Welcome everyone. I'm Frances Stewart. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Education Committee for Elders Climate Action, and we are delighted this evening to have as our guest Marianne Krasny. Marianne is a professor in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment and director of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University. Her latest book, which has just come out this month, In This Together, Connecting Your Community to Combat the Climate Crisis, explores how an ordinary citizen can influence their close friends and family to take meaningful and enjoyable climate action. And Dr. Krasny loves working with members of her lab to teach environmental education and action online courses for a global audience. She's a Public Voices Fellow, climate reality leader with Climate Reality Finger Lakes, and director of public outreach and food policy for the Climate Action Now app, and an international fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Agriculture and Forestry. And being Elders Climate Action, we are particularly proud that she is a very active volunteer with the Elders Climate Action. So Marianne, please take it away.
Thank you, Frances. Really appreciate the introduction. And bear with me as I share my screen and go to slideshow. All right. Does that look good? Great. All right. Well, it's really an honor. I'm really just so pleased to be able to talk to Elders Climate Action. Elders Climate Action's played a big role in me finding a way in how I can contribute to the climate movement, and in ways that are meaningful and also fun in terms of working with the wonderful people at Elders Climate Action. So I'm going to start with a little story about my daily routine. Every morning I walk to work, and inevitably along the way, I find quite a bit of litter. And I'm always thinking about, should I pick up this litter? I oftentimes do pick up the litter. And so when I'm picking up litter, I'm actually engaging in this very trendy, cool sport called plocking, which is picking up litter while walking. But even though this is such a trendy thing for me to be doing, especially at my age as an elder, I'm always thinking for each piece of litter, should I or shouldn't I pick it up? And even though it's only litter, sometimes these two words are enough to wreck my mind. So I'm thinking, yes, no, maybe. And so one of the things I wanted to do today is talk about what my thoughts as I walk to work, and in particular, my thoughts about what's my responsibility for picking up litter, or more broadly, more importantly, what's my responsibility in terms of the climate crisis. And we all know that starting way back in the 1970s, Coca-Cola and Dixie Cup Company, they launched this Keep America Beautiful ad. It's also called the fake crying Indian ad because the actor in it wasn't really an Indian, but they tried to convince us he was. And you can see in the sort of insert, the bottom image there, that their message was people start pollution and people can stop it. So they're trying to convince us that it's our responsibility, even though they're producing this massive amount of litter that inevitably gets strewn across the landscape. So this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about what influences the spread of behaviors. Then I'm going to talk briefly about network climate action, introduce you to that concept. And then at the end, I'll come back to this idea or this question of what is my role? How do I think about my role or responsibility in the climate crisis? So number one, what influences spread of behaviors? I'm going to be talking about three bodies of work briefly: choice architecture, norms, and social network. So let's start right in with choice architecture. For those of you who remember watching Homer Simpson, maybe he's still on, I'm not sure, but you probably remember that he loved donuts, and the cop that he inevitably had interactions with, I think, loved donuts also. And so he would go into the Apu's store and he would look for the donuts. And usually I think they were in a quite convenient location. But one day, Apu decided to switch out the location. You can see the donuts are in a very hard to reach location. And instead he has healthy foods there. So Apu is thinking, my cunning choice architecture will soon have Homer eating healthy. The idea here is that you're creating an environment where the default option or the most convenient option is the right option. By right, I mean the healthy or the climate-friendly option. And this is in a book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein called Nudge, a popular book. Maybe I'm sure some of you have read it. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about my choice architecture experiences. And one of the things that determines whether I decide to pick up that plastic bottle on my way to work is whether or not I know that I'm near to one of the trash cans that's along my pathway to work. If I'm nearer to a trash can, I'm probably going to, or I'm more likely anyways, to pick up that plastic bottle than if I'm going to have to carry it a long distance. But lo and behold, one morning, right in front of this trash can where I usually deposit the trash, I encountered a skunk. So you can believe that I was not going to use this convenient trash can to deposit my trash on that particular morning. All right, so and then one day I decided to do a little experiment. So when I walk to work, I walk by this building. It's called Risley Hall, it's a dormitory. And behind that building, there was a stone bench. And inevitably, every day around that bench was this sort of mass of cigarette butts, and they're pretty unpleasant to pick up. So I really did not want to pick those things up. So I decided that, and I do walk to work in the morning, so it's often dark because I'm pretty much of an early bird. And I decided to place a little can. This looks sort of like a big trash can, but it's actually like one of those little metal tea cans that you might get, and you can see it's on the stone, so it's quite small. And I was thinking, okay, if I make it easy to put one's cigarette butts in a can instead of on the ground, maybe I'll have some impact on that smoker's behavior. And lo and behold, I was successful. Next time I came by, there was all these cigarette butts in the can. I just wanted to talk about a couple other examples of choice architecture. I used to do workshops on environmental education in China. And I remember one in Hangzhou in particular, at Hangzhou Botanic Gardens. And we ordered takeout for lunch. And this was an environmental education workshop. And after lunch, there was just piles and piles of these plastic takeout containers. And I'm feeling like, oh, this is just ridiculous. We're all environmental, conscious people, and look at all the waste we're creating. So I complained a little bit to my host. And the next day, she brought to the workshop a reusable plate and reusable chopsticks and a spoon. And so that day, instead of doing takeout, we went to the cafeteria at Hangzhou Botanic Gardens where the workers usually eat. And you could only get served if you brought your own plate and your own utensils. And they actually had a place to wash your utensils and plates there at the Botanic Gardens. And there was even a place to sterilize them a little back from where you see the people washing their dishes. So I thought that was a great example of choice architecture, and that the easy option, really the only or the default option, was to bring your own dishes and avoid that plastic waste. And I know a lot of you are familiar with the Climate Action Now app, but this is just another example, in this case, of IT, technology, choice architecture through the design of the app, making it very easy to send letters to banks or to send letters to your congresspeople just with a couple of clicks on your phone. All right, so what do we know about choice architecture? One, to summarize, the default or the convenient option is the right option. And second, you can try little experiments yourself to influence choice architecture. You could even place more healthy foods in the front of your refrigerator when your grandchildren come or when you have visitors, for example. Now we're going to move on to norms. And there's a lot of different kinds of norms, but the one that's written about most is probably descriptive norms. And that is what other people do. So these figures aren't right, aren't true. I just made them up. This example of descriptive norm messages. 75% of Americans express concern about the climate. Most elders volunteer for an organization. 9 out of 10 Democrats contribute money to an environmental organization. So we're trying to convey a message that most people are doing this activity, and so you should jump on board and do the activity also. Probably a bunch of you are familiar with this hotel towel experiment. It was a norms experiment, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, what the experiment consisted of was you would go into your bathroom at the hotel and you would receive one of 2 messages. So the first one was, join your fellow guests in helping to save the environment. Almost 75% of guests who are asked to participate in our new resource savings program do help by using their towels more than once. You can join our fellow guests in this program to help save the environment by reusing your towels during your stay. So some people kind of randomized, they came into their bathroom in their hotel room and they saw this message. Another group of people received this message written on a card in the bathroom. Help save the environment. You can show your respect for nature and help save the environment by reusing your towels during your stay. So which message? I hate to tell you, Mark, but I'm going to call on you because you're the only face that I can see. Which message, A or B, do you think resulted in more people reusing their towels? If you could unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
A.
A, which is the descriptive norm message. Okay, we'll see if Mark is right. A. Congratulations, Mark. Yes, the descriptive norm message compared to the other message, which was what we might call an environmental message to save the environment, resulted in 27% higher towel reuse rates. So that's great if you can make a message that the majority of people are doing something. But what if most people do not do the desired behavior? I couldn't tell you that most people are vegans. It's not true. I couldn't tell you that most people write letters supporting climate policies because it's not true. So what do I do? Is there a way to use norms in this situation? And actually there is, and that is the use of dynamic or trending norms. So this one is actually true, at least as true as Forbes magazine is, because I got it off the Forbes website. And it was from an article, so it wasn't really trying to be a norm message. But the truth is that the number of US consumers identifying as vegan grew from 1% to 6% between 2014 and 2017. This was a 600% increase. So you can see the idea is, even though most people aren't vegans, if I told you 1% or even 6% of people are vegans, you probably wouldn't convince you to become a vegan. But I've told you, this is really the trend. Everyone's becoming a vegan, 600% increase in a vegan. That might influence you to change your behaviors. So here's an experiment with dynamic norms. And this was conducted at Stanford University in the cafeteria. And there were 2 norm messages again that the students got as they were waiting in line. So the first message was a static norm. Some people limit how much meat they eat. This is true both nationally and here at Stanford. Specifically, recent research has shown that 30% of Americans make an effort to limit their meat consumption. That means that 3 in 10 people eat less meat than they otherwise would. So a random group of students standing in line got that message. A second group of students got this message, the dynamic norm message. Some people are starting to limit how much meat they eat. This is true both nationally and here at Stanford. Specifically, recent research has shown that over the last 5 years, 30% of Americans have started to make an effort to limit their meat consumption. That means that in recent years, 3 in 10 people have changed their behavior and begun to eat less meat than they otherwise would. Okay, A or B? I'll call on Leslie this time.
I'm going to go with B.
B, dynamic norm. Okay. All right. So before we find out whether Leslie is right, we're going to look at this graph here. And you can see that in the control, the control group did receive a message, but it was random. It wasn't anything about meatless meals or anything like that. So 20% of students in the Stanford lunch line ordered a meatless lunch. So Leslie is going to say then that the higher bar there on the right, where it was about 35%, was B, or was the dynamic norm message. And then the one in the middle, I assume, was the static norm message. I think this test is way too easy because both maybe Mark and Leslie are just both really, really smart. I'm not sure. But anyways, congratulations, Leslie. You got it right. So the dynamic norm message, you can see, resulted in quite a few more students ordering a meatless lunch. And interesting, the static norm message, it's probably not significantly different than the control, but still it's slightly less. So, if you're just telling people not very many people eat meatless meals, then they probably won't order meatless meals. But if you say a bunch of people are starting to, it's the trend, then that might have more of an impact. Okay, so a summary of norms, lessons learned. Descriptive and dynamic norms influence behavior. You can use dynamic norms when behavior is not prevalent. And you can use norm messages with family and friends. So you can devise your own norm messages, maybe dynamic norm messages, descriptive norm messages, depending on the prevalence of the behavior and whether it's increasing. But inevitably, you're going to encounter some situations when the behavior is neither the majority behavior, it's not what most people are doing, and it's not trending. It's not like more and more people are doing it. So just look at this Pew Research survey results from 2021. And you can see that in the past year, about 24% of US adults have made efforts to support climate action. Around 16% donated money to an organization, 10% contacted elected officials, 10% volunteered for an activity, and about 6% attended a protest or a rally. So it could be that these are increasing, but I couldn't find the information. So I'm stuck here. I can't make a trending norm message. And this is not a majority descriptive norm message. The picture is even worse if we want to target boomers or elders. So you can see that 21% of boomers have taken one of these actions, whereas 32% of Gen Zers have taken one of these actions. So I'm kind of stuck. I'm probably not going to use norm messages, but there is something else I can think about. And in this graph, we can see, and here it's not so important, the percentages, because we're not using norm messages, but the important thing is here, the idea that family and friends encourage others to get more involved in efforts to reduce the effects of climate change. So why is this important? This idea about family and friends encouraging people. Just a second here. Okay, I'm going to go to the third part of what influences the spread of behavior, and that's social network structure. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with looking at these social network diagrams, but think of each of those dots, those big black dots, as being a person, and the lines, whether they're straight or whether they're curved, they're a tie or a connection. So a tie or connection means that that person has some sort of interaction with the person that they're tied to. And we have different kinds of networks, regular, small world, and random, and I'll talk about them next. So in what they're calling a regular network here, look at the red arrow. I don't know if you can see my arrow here. So this person has 4 ties with other people in this network. So you can see the tie here on the outside of the circle, but there's also this curved line on the inside that is a tie, not to the person right next to them in the circle or in the network, but to the person 1 person away. And the same is true on the other side. They have 2 ties on this side, so they have 4 ties. Okay, so then we go to the small world network. And here, that person has lost one of these close ties, and they've gained what we call a weak tie to somebody distant to them. So that's shown in this purple arrow. They've gained a tie here, they've lost a tie here. And then the random network, they have mostly weak ties all across the network without a particular pattern. So, I forgot to, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I forgot to show this. So this regular network would be called the close ties network. Oops, this thing is jumping around on me. The middle one is close and weak ties, has both close and weak ties, and the one on the right has weak ties. Close ties means you have frequent interaction with a person. You communicate with them frequently. You get together and do things with them, where weak ties might be somebody you see occasionally or communicate with over social media. All right, so the question arises again. Behaviors spread faster in close tie or weak tie social networks. Why don't people write close or weak in the chat? I can't see the chat, but maybe Mark or Leslie can tell me whether people are writing close or tie or weak tie. So the question is, do you think a behavior like, say, changing your diet or reducing food waste or volunteering for Elders Climate Action or another organization is going to spread faster where you're in a network where you're interacting with people, or in this larger network, but you have weak ties, you're not interacting with each person as much? So you have kind of few people in close ties and a larger network with weak ties. Tell me when somebody writes something in the chat.
There's a lot in the chat and the Q&A. It's pretty closely divided between close and weak.
Okay, great. Thank you, Francis. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is show you a simulation of how behaviors spread in these different networks. And think of the blue filled in squares or dots as being a person who has adopted the behavior. And the white ones are a person who has not yet adopted the behavior. So once I start this, I have to move it up to 120.
We've embedded people in social networks. You can see here the left-hand side has a kind of residential structured network, and the right-hand side has a casual contact network. And then we seeded them with behaviors and watch them spread. I'm going to watch these spread simultaneously. And what you see is that in the residential networks, people are adopting in these neighborhoods, and then there's a spillover effect where the behavior spreads to the next neighborhood, and so forth. In the casual contact network, you can see it sort of spreads all over the network, but it spreads more slowly. And in fact, at the end of this process, you get many more adopters in the residential network than the casual contact network. Now this is striking and really surprising. So what it means is that behavior spread really differently than disease does. So the intuitions from epidemiology about diffusion dynamic.
So congratulations to those who said the strong tie network. And as Dr. Santola, who's done this work, mentioned, that it's really counterintuitive because, let me see if what I got here. Oops,
So we know from
sorry.
epidemiology
Sorry
that
about
the
this.
pattern
I didn't really.
connected to whom, social in a society. The fact that
Oops, sorry about those. Okay, so the close tie networks is the right answer. But as he mentioned, if you're thinking about disease, like let's just say measles, I don't know if you remember a while back, there was an incident where one person or so went to Disney World, they had measles. They didn't have close ties with anybody at Disney World, but there was an epidemic of measles because people were, near each other, and diseases like measles can just spread over very weak ties. You don't have to meet with somebody in your home multiple times. But behaviors, and in particular complex behaviors like climate behaviors, you really need these close ties for the behaviors to spread. And this is just another graphic or a way of thinking about it. So let's look at that person in the middle that the green arrow is pointing to. And that's the person we want to change their behavior. We want them to contribute money to ECA, or let's just say go to a protest. Now that person in black is asking them to do it, and they're saying, I'm not going to protest, just one friend's going. I don't think so. Thanks for, the invitation. Now two people ask. They're still not quite convinced, but we have three people here that ask them, and all of a sudden they change their mind. So that's the power of these strong ties networks, that you're hearing the message from multiple people and you're hearing it multiple times. And that's what people have shown is needed to change these climate behaviors. So the take homes from this part of my talk are multiple messages from multiple messengers are generally needed to change complex behaviors like what we eat, where we donate our money to, or where we volunteer. Complex behaviors spread more rapidly in close tie networks, like family and friends. And again, you can influence your close tie networks. You might have seen this in, some influence you might have on your family, for example. Okay, so now I'm going to move from what influences the spread of behavior to network climate action. Network climate action is pretty simple, has 2 steps. A, you take some climate action yourself. It could be a lifestyle action like reducing food waste, or a policy action like doing something on the Climate Action Now app. And then you apply the research, some of which I just covered, to influence others to take that action alongside you. Okay, so I did a network climate action, and the action was to voluntarily pay for carbon offsets for work travel. And my network was my faculty colleagues. So that's the building I work in over on the left on Furneaux Hall on the Cornell University campus. And I had a little problem convincing my faculty colleagues. So I did eventually expand my network to include family and friends. This isn't always easy. So in terms of choice architecture, how did I apply it? Well, I made donating climate offsets for travel really easy because I gave people the information, the website for the Finger Lakes Climate Fund, and they have a calculator up there that you can calculate, you put in, I'm going from point A to point B. This is how much my carbon emissions will be, and this is how much I should pay for it. And another really cool thing about this organization is that they donate the money to low-income people in our area to weatherize their homes. Okay, they also have what's called the carbon races, and you can form a team and compete in the carbon races. So my team was Furneaux, the name of my building, and friends. And as I said, initially, I had some trouble convincing my colleagues. I really did spend a lot of time cornering them in the hall, talking at our faculty meeting and going into people's office, barging into their offices. But I wasn't getting a whole lot of traction. I was getting some, but wasn't overwhelming. And so I decided that I needed some dynamic norm messages. And then I invited members of my family to join my team. And I even cheated a little bit. I gave them some money to pay for their own carbon offsets so they would join my team. And so then I could say, hey, look, we got 30 members on our team. At one time we were actually number 2 in the carbon races. We've kind of slacked off a little bit, need to get some more donations in there. But you can see that I purposely tried to apply this dynamic norm messages from some of the research that I've covered earlier. Okay, and I just wanted to mention that network climate actions can be policy actions, donation actions, and lifestyle actions. So for example, I had a student at Cornell, and she tried to convince her family, worked with her family to try to get them to do different actions to support the Seattle transportation plan. And then I've had a number of students who contributed to FOM International. And those of you who are familiar with the Drawdown site, you know that women's health and education is considered an important climate action, give women an opportunity to decide their own family size and whether they want to work or not. And in developing countries, women don't always have access, to menstrual supplies, which means that they drop out of school often, and then they don't enter the workforce. So this is a great organization, and my students held a number of fundraisers to convince their fellow sorority members or club members to donate to FOM International. In the upper right-hand corner, I had a student last semester from Shenzhen, China, and he was communicating with his family over social media in China and found out that they were wasting 40 to 50% of the food that was prepared each week. And so he told them about the problem of food waste. And then he discovered that the reason they were wasting so much food is because his dad would often stop on the way home from work and eat dinner with his colleagues. And his mom was preparing meals like every night. So they developed an agreement that the dad would just text the mom when he wasn't going to be home that night. And that she stopped preparing meals when he wasn't going to be home, and they reduced their food waste to 0 to 10% of their food that was prepared. And then the one on the bottom, plant-rich diet, this one is way and above the most popular action that my students have done at Cornell. And I also do online courses with global audiences for this network climate action ideas. And just the students, they really like preparing food, having friends over for a meal. If they're at Cornell and they're far from their family, they like to communicate with their family about different ways to cook. And, they enjoy trying out new recipes. So this one, I would say, is probably the easiest and the most successful of the actions, at least the most popular. All right, so network climate action, just a summary: climate behaviors spread among family and friends. Network climate action involves applying research, and it can speed up this process of these actions spreading. And the actions can be not only lifestyle, but also policy-related actions and donations. Okay, so now I'm coming back to that question that I raised at the beginning. And this is about, how do I think about my responsibility or role in the climate crisis? Well, in picking up litter as I started, but really more importantly in the climate crisis. And I'm thinking back with this cartoon that is in my book. I had a great cartoonist who did a bunch of cartoons in the book, and she used to be a cartoonist for the New Yorker, so I was really lucky to get her. And again, this whole idea of, are the big businesses, whether it's Coca-Cola and the Keep America Beautiful campaign, or now the oil companies, convincing us that they're doing such great things, they're investing in the environment, and we should really appreciate them, and then we should do our part. So I kind of ignore for now all this stuff about what the big businesses are doing, the big companies, oil companies, plastics companies, and I try to think about my own role. And I have found this philosopher, Robin Zhang, she's now at the University of Glasgow, her work very helpful. And in particular, I like this paper she wrote, which is, "What is my role in changing the system? A new model of responsibility for structural injustice." So I'm going to run through her model in 4 steps. First, we all have multiple roles in life. It could be a grandparent, a friend, an alum, a partner, a churchgoer, a volunteer. We can all think of multiple roles that we have. And we all likely have role ideals for each of those roles. So for example, I just became a grandparent for the first time. And so now I have a role as a grandmother. And I'm thinking about, what is my ideal for how I want to be as a grandmother. So third thing is that we can incorporate climate thinking into these everyday roles. So for example, I adhere to plant-rich diet, and maybe that's something that I could do with my granddaughter when I fix meals for her. And I'm sure there's many other ways I could incorporate climate action and climate thinking into my role, and in particular into the role ideal. But to achieve those role ideals, we really need to push our boundaries to do something that might feel a little uncomfortable that we wouldn't do every day. And here's just, if you look on the right, a diagram that says the same thing. So in the middle is a grandmother or a parent, for example, and they have a particular role they feel comfortable with, but they might have a role ideal of what they would really like to be as a parent or as a volunteer or as a teacher, as a churchgoer. And we really need to push our boundaries to try and push ourselves just a little bit every day in life and incorporate climate thinking into what we do to reach those role ideals. All right, so that is, we're coming to the end. And I just wanted to leave you with the message before we get into our discussion that I'll ask you to push your role boundaries to achieve your role ideals as a grandmother, a spouse, a friend, a sibling, and invite your friends and family over for a vegan, or if not a vegan, a plant-rich, plant options barbecue. It's getting to be really nice weather in some parts of the country, not yet here in Ithaca, but I'm sure in other parts of the country. And so we're start thinking about family gatherings and gatherings with friends. And we can think about how we can invite them to taste some new foods they might not have tried, or you can invite them to volunteer with you at ECA or to donate to ECA. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much. As I said, Elders Climate Action has really been an important part of me thinking about my role. It's helped me to move from lifestyle to incorporate these other things like donation and policy actions and roles, or incorporate those into my role. And I also just am doing a little promotion here. I think Jen's going to put it into the chat that my book is In This Together, as Frances mentioned, Connecting with Your Community to Combat the Climate Crisis. It has some of the ideas I talked about today, plus a lot of other ideas. And if you go to Cornell University Press, you can get a 30% discount with 09B card. The book is available in paperback, ebook, and as audio. But only the Amazon site has the audio book because it's a different publisher. It's not Cornell University Press for the audio version. And it's not my voice. It's somebody named Marguerite. So it's a professional reader or book recorder. So thank you so much. And I think I'll stop sharing. And I look forward to the questions and the discussion.
Thanks, Marianne. I really appreciate that great presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. One question was that how many people are watching this? There have been 142 of us online. There'll be more people watching it on YouTube, which is great. Lots of people can get this great information. One of the questions we've got so far is, how can you gentle yourself into adopting a new role or taking on a new climate responsibility? Do you have any examples from your own experience of overcoming habit and resistance?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I do it gently. I think when I did the network climate action with people in my department, that was really pushing myself because I felt very uncomfortable sort of asking people to do something. And I've discussed this with my students, and what they do and what I eventually did is we're just transparent. And my students say, this is an assignment from the class. And so I'm going to ask you over for a meal. And then when they get to the meal, they often talk to them about, the assignment and about why they're doing plant-rich diet, for example. I have noticed that with my children, I feel particularly uncomfortable about pushing them too much, but of course I talk a lot about what they do. And now my daughter is maybe 90–80% vegan, which kind of surprised me. But she's really been but it's been over time. So, and then the other thing, sometimes it's not pushing yourself, it's just sort of deciding to do something. So like I decided I was going to teach and incorporate this stuff into my classes. So in my role as an instructor or teacher, that was pretty easy to incorporate this kind of information. And so I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Another question was, what kinds of climate action have you enjoyed most and gotten the best feeling from?
Actually, I think one of the things I enjoy most is researching and then creating actions out of it. So for example, people think I'm an expert on the Farm Bill because I've done a lot of work on the Farm Bill, but I don't really know much about the Farm Bill, but I have access to a lot of great resources about the Farm Bill. And so I spent several months researching it. And then, and there were a lot of great resources out there. And then I did about 150 CAN actions for the app, the Climate Action Now app, where I applied what I'd learned. And then I also did with Elders Climate Action Policy Committee and Climate Reality, my local chapter, we did a organizational sign-on letter on the Farm Bill on agricultural methane in particular. And so for me, that's been the most rewarding because I really enjoy learning new things and then getting to translate it into things that are useful for people. But somebody else, as I said, most of my students plant-rich diet, having people over for meals is really the most fun.
Mm-hmm. And somebody mentioned that we're having some problems with the chat and with the links, and we'll try to solve those while we're still online tonight, but we definitely will get you that information in the email that goes out to you if we can't do it tonight. Well, it'll be there either way, but in the email, but we'll try to get it sooner than that. Another question is, how much do you think individuals and networks voluntarily taking action to reduce their carbon footprint, such as veganism, can affect the climate crisis? And the concern that government action is needed to get the nation to reduce all carbon at once, and that we need to elect people who will do the things that need to be done.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really important point, but I do think that we don't need to think about it as either or. And so, for example, let's just say that one of the policies, I mean, I come back to plant-rich diet a lot because I think the methane emissions and the nitrous oxide emissions of cattle and dairy operations are really important in reducing greenhouse gases. So definitely plant-rich diet is not a norm, right? And maybe it's a slightly trending norm, but not really getting up there. So if a politician wants to do some policy on dairy or livestock, there's no way, right? So it kind of has to happen both ways. On the other hand, like with EVs or some other things, solar panels, enough people have adopted them that they're kind of accepted within society. And that makes it a lot easier to pass legislation. So that's one point. And the other point is, I really think people need to do what they feel comfortable with doing. So not everybody's going to like writing, letters for the Climate Action Now app or doing research on agriculture methane. It probably sounds pretty dry to most people, but you might enjoy having family and friends over. And we do know that behaviors spread. Another example is, and they can spread from neighborhood to neighborhood. So Robert Frank, who's an economist at Cornell, has a book, Under the Influence, which talks a lot about how behaviors spread, influence from each people. And they did some work, and there's an art, you can search this, Robert Frank, Solar Panels in the Atlantic, on how if one person in a neighborhood puts a solar panel that's visible on the roof, other neighbors will copy it. So you have pockets of people with solar panels. So yeah, you can sort of say that that's all individual action, is homeowner action, is not really very important. But you create a community like that, and who knows, then maybe city government will want to support them because they know that people are interested in it. People have demonstrated that they're interested. So I do think there's a lot of overlap, and I do talk about that in the book, some other ways that there's overlap.
Yeah. Marianne, some people really want your slides. Are we going to be able to share them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll talk to Jen because not all the illustrations are credited that aren't my own, but they're not all open access. So I don't know how you handle that, Jen, but we'll discuss it.
Okay, because you do have some great illustrations, but even without the illustrations, you got great information. Another question was, do you personally use social networking apps like Facebook and Twitter to try to influence people on climate?
No, because I gave up. I'm not like Francis, who has 12,000 followers. I've gotten very discouraged with what's going on with Twitter politically, and then Facebook seems to have died off. So I've used those more for communication channels amongst people in our global online courses. And we use WhatsApp quite a bit because we have a lot of international students, and that's what they use. These are the not Cornell students, but professionals. But I don't think I'm an influencer. My son-in-law keeps saying Robert Reich is like, do you know who he is? The former Secretary of Labor. He has a YouTube channel that people love and tries to convince them about different economic principles and policies. And my son-in-law says, well, Robert Reich is like 4'8" and you're 5'2". You should be able to be an influencer, and you better form your own YouTube channel. But he hasn't offered me any tips on how to do it. So I don't think I'm going to be Robert Reich. And so, yeah, I don't use social media very much. Just I use it in my job to communicate with students.
I think Robert Reich has some media folks who help him out with that.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I need to get a hold of them when I get rich.
So, Marianne, if there was one thing you would recommend that people who are on the call tonight do, what would it be?
Well, I do think, I mean, the first thing, several things come to mind, well, I think you should all take actions on the Climate Action Now app, for one thing, because it's so easy. And yes, we don't really know if it has an influence, but everybody is taking actions, and there's a lot of, letters being sent to Congress. But I think, look at your role as a volunteer too. And it could be with Elders Climate Action, but it could be with your church. You could be connecting people in your church to Elders Climate Action or your local climate reality chapter. And so you might be, if you're in other organizations, and maybe that's where your heart is, you can still serve as a bridge between some climate organizations. And that's a super important role, because people in churches might be interested, but they might not have a lot of information, and they might not know where to go for information.
And that's really, a very important point. A lot of people are asking about the chat. We can send you the links that are in the chat. I'm sorry people are having a problem with that. I'm seeing the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat that you can click on and save the chat. But working on that, or using that is great if you want to do that. If not, you'll be getting the chat links soon when we send you the email. Another question was, what percentage of a community has to be convinced in order to reach a tipping point?
Well, you probably know Erica Chenoweth's work and the 3.5%, and a lot of people use that. If 3.5% of a population, she did research on demonstrations, protests in many different settings over 100 years or however many, maybe more, and I think in different countries. And she found that if 3.5% of the people come out on the streets, then that's going to change the government. And we can see this in Israel now. It's over 3.5%. I forget what it was, but it was pretty. Leslie, you're nodding. I don't know if you remember what percentage they said was coming out, 10% or something, or 16%. I can't remember. So I see some of the people that write about climate using Chenoweth's 3.5% of the population just needs to protest about climate and it'll change. But she actually talks about climate in one of our articles, and she says, climate's different. We're trying to change policies. Her research was what brought a government down. So she doesn't really know what figure we would want to apply to changing climate policy.
Somebody asked about Climate Action Now in Twitter. The Twitter handle for Climate Action Now is actually at My Climate App, if you're looking for it there. If you're looking for the website, it's climateactionnow.com. Someone asking about climate offsets. What climate offset organizations really accomplish things?
Yeah, so I'm not qualified to answer that. I apologize. I don't know if somebody wants to put some in the chat. Obviously, Finger Lakes Climate Fund is not certified as, a national offsetter or international offsetter. And I don't know much about the certification process, but what they do is okay. So when I did this network climate action with the climate offsets in my department, some people weren't that interested in offsetting their travel emissions. But when they found out the money went to local low-income families, like in our region, our neighbors essentially, to weatherize their homes, and I'm in upstate New York, so we do have a lot of poverty up here, rural poverty. And they got interested in contributing. So there's different reasons people might want to contribute. And I'm not answering the direct question about offsets, I'm sorry, but I do think that that's kind of a powerful model that they have, even if, we're not exactly figuring out how much carbon they're absorbing out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, carbon offsets are a really complex topic with lots of certifications and this, that, and the other thing. But having something that is an organization that's local that and you can see, I think for a lot of people is very powerful. Please don't worry about the chat. We're sorry it's not working the way that we want it to. We will get you all that information. You're not going to be missing that. Let's see. Now, here is a question from Fred Krasny who says, who is your favorite brother?
Oh, I have 2 favorite brothers. He's not going to like that response, but
I take it Fred is probably one of them.
yes.
Okay. And one thing, not a question, but something important for people to know about is today is the last day to submit comment to the EPA on soot. If you haven't done a comment on soot, we have a link in the chat that you can click on. Soot is, it sounds maybe kind of trivial, but soot is very important for two reasons. One is that it's extraordinarily important in our health. It affects our lungs, our heart, our chances of having a stroke or having Alzheimer's or other neurologic problems, chances of a pregnancy not going well and having a stillbirth or a premature birth or a miscarriage, affects all kinds of things. Plus, soot, that black carbon in soot, is an extremely important part of carbon pollution that increases global warming. So the EPA rule on that is extremely important. It's probably not as strong as it should be. So if you haven't already commented, if you could do that, that would be a great thing to do. Oh, another question. How have you found your engagement in Elders Climate Action? How has that helped you to move forward with your climate activism?
How did Elders Climate, I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat. How did Elders Climate Action help me move forward with my climate activism? Okay,
Yeah.
so it was really important because I kept thinking about lifestyle action, which I take. You know, I don't waste food. I walk to work. I don't eat. I eat a almost vegan diet. And I kept thinking I needed to do something more. But the only thing, and I feel like it wasn't that many years ago, maybe 5. So I feel like I was really ignorant. But I kept thinking, well, you know, I'm not going to join one of these lawsuits because I don't know, how am I going to join one of these lawsuits that we hear about for, you know, that with the young people are bringing about against the government or the big oil companies. So I couldn't figure out any way to get involved in climate policy. And I wrote to a few organizations and said, you know, can I do this? And I have these skills, and they didn't respond. And I realized they were sort of like their member, what they call the member organizations versus participatory organizations. And then I wrote to Elders Climate Action. I think, Leslie, you were the one who responded to me, and we got on a call and we talked. And it was kind of funny, especially because I'm giving this talk today, because I sort of thought, well, you know, I'm a Cornell professor, maybe I could give a talk. And Leslie sort of said, no, I don't think so. You know, you kind of got to go through the hoops. So now about 4 or 5 years later, I finally reached the point where I could give a talk to ECA. But I guess I just didn't realize that volunteering with an organization was a great way to influence policy. I'm not sure why it never dawned on me. And this was the first organization that kind of took me under their wings and said, yeah, you can be a part and you can be a participant and help to do what we can to educate and influence policy. So that's why I really appreciate the ECA experience.
And we really appreciate having you. Now, another question, you've been at this for decades. While CO2 continues to increase and impacts of climate change increase, what keeps you hopeful, especially now that you're a grandmother?
Well, because what's the alternative is to be not hopeful, right? Then you're not very functioning. You're not even going to be a good grandmother if you're going to be depressed all the time. So, and, you know, sometimes people talk about the civil rights movement. If I was a Black person in the 1950s, would have I had much hope? Maybe not, but what was the alternative? And, you know, they did change things. So maybe I'm being totally unrealistic, but I feel like this is meaningful for me. Hopefully I'm, you know, maybe I'm making a difference and I'm enjoying it, and I'm bringing other people along through multiple roles. So.
That's like a great reason for me. A couple of things that aren't a question. One is that someone commented that they did the comment on soot, and it was very easy. So hopefully that will encourage people who haven't done it yet. And also, Harry Moody said, I want to thank Marianne Krasny not only for this wonderful talk, but for her immense contribution as chair of the advisory committee on Climate Action Now. She has spoken eloquently about what Climate Action Now does, and I know it myself from personal experience. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay. And
And I just want to interject real quick, Francis, that we'll make sure that the link for Climate Action Now app is also in the email, follow-up email tomorrow for anybody who it doesn't have the Climate Action Now app on their phone. Tomorrow, we'll make sure you have the code and the information you need to get that app.
Yeah, it's a great way to make taking climate action easy, because sometimes it can seem really overwhelming, and the app makes it easy to do a lot of things, which goes with Harry Moody's comment, quoting David Orr, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And really want to thank Marianne for this wonderful talk this evening, and for her book and all the other work that she's doing. Next month, we're going to have another call we're really excited about, what you need to know about permitting reform with Dana Nessitelli. Permitting reform got off to kind of a bad start with Senator Manchin and his dirty deal, which fortunately did not go through. But we really need permitting reform to be able to build the renewable energy projects and the electric transmission projects that we need for a transition to clean energy. So how to do that is a huge issue. And we're fortunate to have someone who knows a great deal about that. Citizens Climate Lobby research coordinator and climate journalist, Dana Nessitelli, who's going to be with us on April 25th at 7 o'clock to discuss what permitting reform is, why it's important for America's climate targets, what the Biden administration and Congress can do to achieve it, and why some climate justice organizations are concerned about it, so that we can help to find our way through to a solution that gets us where we need to go for the clean energy transition, and that is equitable for everyone. So we're really excited about that, and we hope we will see you next month. And so thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.